Hi, and welcome. You are now watching 12 Years for a Crime That Never Happened, the William Mullins-Johnson case. Imagine being sent to prison for over a decade for a crime that never even happened. In 1994, William Mullins-Johnson was wrongfully convicted for murdering his 4-year-old niece, Val. The entire case against him relied heavily on autopsy evidence provided by Dr. Charles Smith, a pathologist whose work was later proven to be deeply flawed and unreliable. Because of this, Mullins-Johnson lost years of his life, 12 to be exact. It wasn't until years later until a new forensic expert re-examined the evidence and uncovered the truth. Valen had actually died from natural causes, not a homicide. This case is powerful. It reminds us that forensic evidence, if it's misunderstood or blindly trusted, the consequences can be devastating. This case involved several key individuals who played major roles in what happened. William Mullins-Johnson was the man who was wrongfully convicted. The victim, his 4-year-old niece, Valen Johnson. One of the most influential figures in this case was Dr. Charles Smith, a well-known forensic pathologist at the time. He strongly supported the theory that Valen had been abused and asphyxiated. This testimony heavily influenced the outcome of the trial. Despite the accusations, William's mother, Lauren Hales, stood by his side and remained his only supporter. Years later, defense lawyer David Bayless helped prove his innocence. Now let's move it over to what actually happened. This case quickly became a tragedy that extended far beyond Val's death. William was not only accused, but he was also judged by those closest to him. His own family came to believe he was guilty, which led to anger, isolation, and loss of nearly all support. At the same time, early medical observations, including bruisings and signs of illnesses, raised suspicions of abuse. However, these findings were not only confirmed with solid evidence, instead, assumptions were made, and those assumptions quickly escalated into a case involving sexual assault and murder. As a result, William lost more than just his freedom. He lost his family, his reputation, and over a decade of his life, all based on a conclusion that we were later proven to be wrong.
Where it all went wrong. In June 1993, in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, 4-year-old Valan was put to bed and later found unresponsive by her mother. Following her death, investigators focused on the home and began examining physical evidence. Bruising was observed around her neck and chest, which raised immediate concerns of possible abuse. Based on these findings, authorities estimated the time of death to be between 8 and 10 p.m., and quickly developed a timeline pointing towards William. Shortly after, he was arrested and charged with serious offenses, despite the lack of direct physical evidence linking him to the crime. In 1994, he was convicted and as a result spent over 12 years in prison for a crime that was later proven to have never occurred. This demonstrates how early assumptions can lead to devastating consequences.
Moving on to why was he convicted? One of the most important questions in this case is why was William convicted despite there being no solid physical evidence? First, the case relied heavily on forensic testimony, particularly from Dr. Charles Smith, who was seen as an expert at the time. His confidence in authority made the jury trust his conclusions, even though they were later proven to be incorrect. Second, investigators built a timeline that seemed to fit William's involvement. Even without direct evidence, this timeline created a narrative that made him appear guilty. There was also intense emotional pressure. The death of a young child is tragic, and both the jury and the family are looking for answers. This can sometimes lead to rushed conclusions. And additionally, another flaw is police use strong interrogation tactics, including falsely claiming they have forensic evidence, which can influence how a suspect is perceived. In the end, all these factors combined flawed forensic science, assumptions, and pressure led to a conviction that the jury reached in just 9.5 hours.
How the truth was finally uncovered. William Mullins-Johnson was originally charged with aggravated sexual assault and first-degree murder, based largely on assumptions and flawed forensic conclusions. During the investigation, police applied significant pressure, even going as far as falsely claiming that they had forensic evidence, such as DNA, linking him to the crime. These tactics were used to try to get a confession and reinforce the belief that he was guilty. Years later, the case was taken on by the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted, who began reinvestigating the evidence. However, their efforts were delayed for years because critical tissue samples needed for reanalysis had gone missing. Those samples had originally been handled by Dr. Charles Smith, who claimed he could not locate them. For a long time, this prevented any new forensic testing from being done. Eventually, after further investigation and pressure by the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted, Dr. Smith's office was searched, and the missing samples were finally discovered. They were sent to Ontario's chief pathologist for a proper and independent review. Once re-examined, the findings completely contradicted the original conclusions. Experts determined that Vallon had died of natural causes, not from abuse or homicide. This new forensic evidence exposed the flaws in the original investigation and ultimately led to William Mullins-Johnson being exonerated after spending over 12 years in prison for a crime that never occurred. Trusted science, false conclusions. A key forensic technique used in this case was forensic pathology, which involves examining a body to determine the cause and manner of death. Pathologists look at injuries, internal organs, and physical signs like bruising to decide whether a death was natural or caused by violence. In this case, those observations were misinterpreted as signs of abuse and asphyxiation. This highlights an important limitation. While forensic science is powerful, it can also be subjective and influenced by bias. One major issue is confirmation bias, where investigators or experts interpret evidence in a way that supports what they already believe. Once William became the suspect, the evidence was viewed in a way that pointed towards his guilt, not his innocence. Additionally, the jury placed strong trust in expert testimony, particularly from Dr. Charles Smith, whose conclusions were later proven to be incorrect. This case shows that when forensic science is misunderstood or misused, it can lead to devastating consequences and wrongful convictions.